Hello and welcome to another edition of The Front Page on GNAT TV. My name is Andrew McKeever, the managing editor of the Manchester Journal. It's my pleasure to be your host today. It's also my pleasure to have with us in our studio today a special guest, Matt Dunne, who is running for the Democratic nomination for governor. Matt, welcome to GNAT.
Thanks, great to be here.
Matt Dunne ran for governor in 2010. It was one of a five-member field that was eventually taken by Peter Shumlin, and of course Mr. Shumlin then went on to serve 3 terms in the governor's mansion. Matt is now one of those people who's seeking to take over that office next time. In 2006, he ran for lieutenant governor and was defeated that year by Brian Doobie. Before that, from 2002 to 2006, he was a state senator from Windsor County. And from 1992 to 1998, represented Heartland and West Windsor in the State House. And I might add, when he was first elected in 1992, he was only 22 years old, one of the youngest members, I'm sure, to ever sit in that chamber. He's also had an interesting career elsewhere as well, beyond Vermont politics. During the 1990s, he was the director of AmeriCorps. Some of you may recall the VISTA program from the 1960s and earlier. AmeriCorps is a 6,000-person anti-poverty program run by the federal government. And since 2006, he has been working for Google, the search engine internet firm many of you are familiar with. And he created and directed their community affairs program. And Matt, I'd like to start with that.
Sure.
That sounds like a fascinating job. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do with Google? And I guess also how might that be influencing your approach to government and some of the positions you're taking on the campaign?
Sure. So many people have described it as bringing a little bit of Vermont to a large internet company. And one of the challenges that Google had as it was growing was not in how it communicated with its users, because I think, as many people know, the relationship between Google and the people who use the internet is very good, but they didn't know so well how to communicate with folks in the communities, where they were building large data centers or their offices, or eventually building out Google Fiber internet connectivity. Mm-hmm. And so my job was to make sure that we were good corporate citizens locally, that we were transparent with our communications, that we were able to allow for communities to set themselves up for this kind of infrastructure investment. And so it included at first just doing what you would expect of a corporate citizen in a region, which was to talk to people about what we were doing, make it clear what we weren't doing, and then start a philanthropy program that focused on helping people bridge the digital divide and training people in how to use computer software, or helping small businesses and nonprofits get online and be more successful. And then in the last 5 years, we've been involved in 2 really interesting initiatives. One was having convinced the Google Treasury to invest in affordable housing. So we actually were able to walk the walk in these communities where we were creating jobs, but sometimes creating some gentrification by actually investing hundreds of millions of dollars in building new units of affordable housing throughout the country. And then the other one is the Google Fiber initiative. So I talked a lot in 2010 about the importance of broadband. Mm-hmm. And to this day, it is still important. Sure. And we still have a lot of work to do. Since that time, I had to actually go and do it. And you learn a lot when you're actually having to do it. And it's a lot harder, but it's been an amazing experience working with cities across the country. Some of those cities, in fact, most of them are the size of the state of Vermont, and helping the city governments be good partners in being able to do these kinds of deployments that make a huge difference, that bring the fastest internet connectivity in the world to their citizens, and not just to the big businesses, but straight to people's homes. And I couldn't have gotten a better graduate school program in seeing which cities did that kind of partnership well and which ones struggled, and why. And it's that kind of firsthand experience that will allow me to take a look at the state government enterprise and think about how we can do things differently. Because I think one of the challenges in Vermont is that we've been running state government somewhat the same way we have for the last 40 years. I don't think it's necessarily the most efficient, and I don't think it's moving our economy where it needs to be. And so I would want to bring that experience that I've uniquely had, both on actually deploying significant infrastructure and business investment, but also in working with some really, really smart government enterprises to be able to make our state that much more efficient and effective in growing our economy.
So why run for governor? I guess that's a question I always ask anyone who comes in here who wants to run for high office. It's got to be a grueling job, very demanding. You know, people take pot shots at you all the time. They don't agree with you, on and on and on. What is the motivation to aspire to the office?
So I grew up in a family that was made up of a civil rights activist who turned a country lawyer and helped start the Vermont Land Trust, who was my father. And my mother was one of the first women to go through tenure track and get tenure at Dartmouth College. She was chair of the ed department and committed her life to supporting a generation of teachers. So public service is something that was just always in my family, that it's how you give back in one way or another. But at the end of the day, I really love Vermont. This is my home. This is where my ancestors are from. When Google reached out to me to create a community affairs program and build a team, they almost immediately said, "How soon can you move to San Francisco?" And I said, "Never." And they said, "What are you talking about? You have a chance to move to San Francisco." And I said, "This is home, and this is important." And I said, "Give it a shot." I believe that I can run a program for a company like this from Vermont. And they did, and it worked. And that is, when it comes down to it, why I want to run for governor. And that's because the state that I love, I think, is struggling. And we're seeing it particularly down in this area where poverty is rising and young families are leaving the state. We have an economy that is struggling on a variety of fronts, and employers can't find qualified workers to expand even if they wanted to. And I have 3 kids, Abe, Judd, and Cora, that my wife Sarah and I are raising in the farmhouse where I grew up. And I want to make sure that there's a Vermont where they can live, raise a family, and thrive.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the economy, since, as always, that's an issue in the election. It is, I'm sure, every 2 years when election years roll around. In particular, I guess I'd be interested to hear, and you touched upon it a bit in your last answer there, your views on the economy of the southern part of the state. I mean, the state's economy as a whole is not, I suppose, in horrible shape. We have a relatively low unemployment rate, at least by national standards. Although, as seems to be the case elsewhere around the country, salaries seem to be kind of stuck for a lot of folks. Are not able to kind of see the kind of wage gains that might have been anticipated 20, 30 or so years ago. But recently there was a report released that focused on the four southern counties in Vermont, and it painted kind of a bleak picture of where we were at. An aging population, a declining population in terms of numbers, workers that were leaving to go elsewhere, jobs that were going begging because there weren't qualified workers to fill them. So if you're elected governor, what would you do about any of that?
And this is going to be the #1 task for the governor of the state of Vermont. And just to put a few more specifics on it for this area, and this has been the amazing part of running for office. Right out of the gate, what we did was 20 community forums in all 14 counties, because I feel like it's important that if you're running for governor, you represent the entire state, and that means you have to listen to people in the entire state. And as someone who lives south of Route 4, it's very important to realize that the health of the economy of Vermont is about the health of the economy of the whole state. But some of the statistics that came out in that report and that I've been hearing from folks are really startling. The number of people in poverty in Bennington County has grown by 50% since the year 2000. We've seen areas of the state where 10% of the student population is homeless. And just speaking to the superintendent of schools recently, the growth in the number of kids on free and reduced lunch has gone from the low 20% area to over 50% in the schools right here. So those are serious issues, and if I was back at AmeriCorps Vista and we had a heat map of where there were communities that were at risk of being in real crisis, this would show up. And so we have to take action, and we have to take action quickly to be able to turn this around. And I think we can do it. I mean, we have all of the difficult things in our state, right? We have a beautiful landscape. We still have very strong K-12 schools. We have innovative people who want to try new things. We have the best beer in the world, right? We've got aspects that you couldn't just go and create someplace else that should be fertile ground for entrepreneurs and growth. We just have to be intentional about it. So it fits into three categories for me. One is that I think we have to do our own mini stimulus package. I think we have to build infrastructure that can support the entrepreneurs in the economy of our time. And I think we need to build out an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Stop thinking about going out and trying to harpoon a big whale of a company and drag it back into the state, because that's not where we've been successful as a state throughout our 200-year history. It's been on supporting entrepreneurs. So on the stimulus side, my proposal is to do a $100 million energy efficiency bond that would bring contractors to work in making our multi-unit housing as efficient as possible. The savings from that efficiency work would pay down the bond, so it wouldn't affect our general fund, but it would create jobs, do right by our climate, and make our multi-unit buildings much more affordable and better place to live, because in fact it's very old housing stock that, if it could be improved, would be the kind of place that younger millennials would actually want to live and be a part of a community. The second is that we should develop a statewide microenterprise program. And what this is from having learned at AmeriCorps Vista that one of the best ways to empower people out of poverty and get displaced workers back on their feet is to help them to start their own small business. It works internationally. It actually works really well in the US. And I think Vermont is prime for that kind of approach to help us rebuild our downtown kind of businesses, or businesses that could sell value-added products to the entire world just from here in Vermont. So that would be the second piece. On the infrastructure side, we need to have broadband connectivity, as I mentioned, and the experience I've had gives me a real roadmap for how we can get that done, and we can get it done quickly, but we need to get rolling on it before we get further behind. And we also need to make sure that we've got the kind of infrastructure for business travel, which means that if we get the internet connectivity, we could become the telecommuting capital of the world. But even when you're telecommuting, you need to get to major cities and locations on occasion. And we're fortunate that we're actually quite close, if you look at a map, to New York, Boston, and Montreal, very big business hubs. But we need to be able to get in and out by air and by rail. And those are going to be key investment strategies moving forward. And then in creating an entrepreneurial ecosystem, part of that is just celebrating our successes, whether it's beer or great cheese, or software companies like Dealer.com that sold for $1 billion, but we haven't told that story. Or the LED company that came out of Vermont Technical College and is now employing 90 people in changing the way that lighting is done in a much more energy efficient environment.
All interesting ideas. One other issue that's actually very, very current and very hot at the moment is centers around education, which you mentioned. Act 46, as we all know, has been a very controversial piece of legislation.
Sure.
Trying to sort of consolidate school districts and supervisory unions down to more efficient entities. And one of the issues that seems to be very much on the minds of state legislators at the moment, even as we're speaking here in early January, is the spending cap question.
Sure.
I guess I have a two-part question. One is, what is your overall reaction to Act 46 and what it's trying to do in the big picture, long term? And secondly, if you were governor now and the spending cap question was surfacing, What would your feeling be? Would you feel that should be something that should be repealed, as some have argued, or moderated, reduced down to, or the spending cap tweaked a little bit so that it wouldn't be quite so difficult for some school districts to get to avoid a penalty?
Well, we need to change. I mean, we have gone from 128,000 students to about 78,000 today. And that was, I think, since 1997. So a significant decline. The frustrating thing for me is that that's not the school's fault, right? That's because we have not actually done the work to create an economy that works for all Vermonters and all Vermont. But that being said, we need to change because you just simply can't spend the same amount on that many students. So the Act 46, I think, was passed in an attempt to try to address those changes. And I think there are parts of it that are just fine and allow for conversations to happen about consolidations that have been talked about for years and years, and actually give them the incentives to be able to do it. But there are parts of it that were really problematic, and the double property tax spending caps were certainly one of those. And for those who don't know, what it means is that if a school loses a few students and suddenly goes over what is really an arbitrary cap, then people are charged double property taxes. And I think I haven't met a Vermonter who thinks they should be paying double property taxes.
We're already paying double.
I mean, exactly. Well, and that's precisely the point. Property taxes are too high, and essentially this would make them much higher, particularly for communities that are going through population declines because the economy is not working for them, but they can't cut the budget as in proportionate to that. Much less the fact that the cost of education, because we haven't dealt with healthcare costs and other things, are continuing to go up. The other thing that the caps, the double property tax caps put in place was that even if you were a school that was spending much less money than other school districts and you wanted to catch up, you would get hammered by it. So let's say you're a school that is finally going to do the kind of early intervention investment to reduce special ed over the long term, you would have to pay double someone who happened to have done it last year. Right? And that doesn't make any sense at all. So it's pretty clear that the law is unfair, if not unconstitutional, and they need to repeal it right now because it's a real distraction.
The entire law?
No,
The spending caps.
The spending caps.
Yeah.
I don't believe that Act 46 should be repealed altogether. But I also think there are other areas that Act 46 didn't even touch that we could use to make our schools better and more cost effective. The first is that there is no reason with the size of our school system in the state of Vermont that we need multiple payroll systems. We could actually consolidate those all together. We could have one electronic student record rather than each individual school district buying their own, and then they can't communicate to each other. That doesn't make any sense either. We could actually do that centrally and allow for our limited education dollars to go to frontline delivery of education, which is where they should go. And having been in business, I helped grow a Vermont-based company to over 100 employees. I'm now running the community affairs program for Google, where my whole team is distributed all over the country. And when you go through downsizing, you want to make sure that you're eliminating overhead costs first. And to me, that's where I would focus my time, is making sure that every dollar that a taxpayer pays is going to making sure that education is better. The other piece that I think is really an opportunity we can pursue is assisted distance learning. So in many of our smaller schools, because they're smaller, they're struggling to keep up with curricular offerings. Using video conferencing and a teacher whose subject matter expertise may not be in that area, but in person, but then connecting to schools where there is an expert, whether it's in advanced algebra or Chinese or some other area of study, and you can get the 3 kids here and the 2 kids over there and the 5 kids over here who want to avail themselves of that, all being able to learn together. And we can use our sense of community as a state to actually deliver a better education than we're delivering now, and be a model for rural education done in an efficient way for the rest of the country.
Yeah, I mean, in the lurking in the background of all of this, it seems to me that if property taxes are an issue here in the state, and they are, if cost of education is an issue, and I think it's fair to say it is. I mean, you could probably make a case that in the aggregate we're spending about the right amount of money, but could we target it better? Could we find better ways, more effective ways to use it? I find myself wondering at some point, when do school buildings start closing down? Because that's really where the money is. It seems like we can talk about combining payroll systems or merging supervisory unions and not needing as many superintendents or whatever, and that's probably useful savings to obtain, but that's not going to, I think, crack the big picture. That happens when we have 30 or 40,000 fewer students than we used to have in 1980 or whenever.
Right.
At some point, buildings need to be rethought or reimagined.
Sure.
Is that something you feel comfortable
Absolutely.
urging?
Look, but you have to do it in a way that's looking well out into the future and what the implications are for those communities. So certainly rethinking how buildings are designed is very, very important, because again, if you're going to be trying to give kids more access to curriculum, it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to hire specialty teachers for every single school across the board, but you can actually give them greater access to curriculum at a lower cost by doing that kind of sharing. And that takes better coordination from the agency of education to be able to make sure that those timings line up, that the resources are there, and then the building just looks and feels and is used differently. And I think that's a good thing. And we can do that in a way that makes a difference. There are some schools that will need to consolidate and change, and I think we can all agree on that. But you have to be careful, because in some cases, under some of the targets that were laid out as part of Act 46, it would mean closing schools so that kindergartners would have to commute an hour each way to be able to get to school. And the implications of that is that that community will no longer be a place that families will want to move. And then that community will become a dependent on the rest of the state. And if we are in this trough in terms of the economy as we're transitioning from commodity dairy and large-scale manufacturing to something else, we need to make sure that we don't lose those core assets, like having a place, at least for an elementary school, for kids to go to in our more remote parts of the state, so that when the economy does come back, those can become vibrant parts of our overall state's economy.
One other issue that's coming up this year that has also sparked a lot of discussion, of course, is the whole question around legalizing marijuana.
Sure.
If you're a governor, would you sign a bill saying, okay, let's do it?
I would, but under some serious constraints. So I believe that legalized marijuana is coming. Whether it's going to be us going before other states, I don't know, but it is a moving train that we're not going to stop. Prohibition generally has a certain lifespan, and I think it's just a matter of time before Maine and Massachusetts, that are planning on putting on ballot initiatives fairly soon, would move forward. And the question is whether Vermont wants to actually do it in a safe Vermont way. And I actually believe that regulated, legalized marijuana can make it safer and can reduce the number of young people for whom it actually can affect brain development from actually using. And the way you do that is you regulate it really, really well. You make sure you have all the pieces of labeling and other kinds of safety constraints that I think Vermont is known for, so that you can trust the product that's there. And we also should not look at this as some huge windfall that's going to solve all of our economic problems, because where I would put the resources up front is making sure we have enforcement so that we actually eliminate the black market that is currently out there, and I think is actually doing more harm than a regulated environment. And the other is in prevention. And if we were able to really do a concentrated effort on prevention in schools, both on marijuana but also drugs that are incredibly addictive and harmful, like heroin, we could actually make a difference in making our kids healthier and actually setting us up for better future on a bunch of fronts. So that's where I would focus the resources that would go with it. And if there is additional revenue that comes out of that, that's great. But my first concern is to make sure that we do it right, we do it our way. We're not reacting to other states that may just open it up, like they did in Colorado with a real Wild West approach, and make sure that we make our state safer.
Time for one last question. Single payer was a subject near and dear to Peter Shumlin's heart when he became governor. It didn't work out.
Sure.
The costs just didn't, the numbers didn't add up, whatever. I guess I was just wondering, if you were elected governor, would you be advocating for a single payer plan?
Over the last 3 years, I've actually served on the board of Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center.
Okay.
And I thought I knew something about healthcare in 2010.
But now you know a lot more.
I do, and it's been interesting to be there through the Affordable Care Act and its implications, and watching how the accountable care organizations have actually functioned, which are creating systems and networks between hospitals to actually have coordination. And I'm walking away feeling more confident than ever that we can actually make changes in healthcare, because the providers know that what we're doing is not sustainable. Because right now, the major problem is that we are still paying for volume. We're still on this fee-for-service basis, so that at the end of the quarter, providers, in order to make their numbers, are having to figure out how many MRIs can be taken and how many beds you can fill. And that's crazy. And the cost of healthcare in Vermont, as I understand, is continuing to go up at $650,000 a day. Overall cost. That's not sustainable. That's affecting us at the kitchen table budget all the way through to the state budget, and it's really the reason why there is the hole in the budget that there is. So we have to change from a fee-for-service basis to actually paying for public health. And we can do that. We can do that quickly, again, because the providers know that that's going to be a more sustainable effort. We can do it without touching Medicare, and we can make a real impact on how healthcare is delivered so that they prioritize preventative care and not have people showing up in the emergency room having to have their leg amputated because they have advanced type 2 diabetes, but in fact take care of it up front at the lowest cost moment, both fiscally and in terms of impact on humans. So we have to move down that road, and I think if we move down that road, we can then continue towards universal health care, because ultimately that's where we need to be. It's not a marketplace like people think. When my brother, who some people may remember, at the end of the campaign in 2010, I had to leave the campaign because he almost died of a stroke. And it's what you do. We both of our parents have passed away. And when he was being put in an ambulance, we were not shopping around for the least expensive brain surgery, right? You show up where you're going to show up. And he didn't have insurance because he had 2 part-time jobs, neither of which provided insurance. And you know what? The cost of his procedures, which we're very thankful for because he is alive and doing very well today because of it, most of it came back on the rest of us in our premiums. And that doesn't make any sense. We need to make sure that we are actually investing in health care for public health, where everyone is covered, everyone pays, and we have the right health care at the right time.
Okay. Well, I have a feeling we could talk about this a lot longer, but we're just about out of time. But I wanted to thank you again, Matt Dunne, for being here with us today to talk about the issues and talk about your campaign for governor, and thank all of you for watching as well. I hope it's been an interesting and informative show for you all. This has been the Front Page on GNAT TV. We'll see you again the next time.